Hey everyone, and welcome back to Don't Get Me Started with DRMS, your go-to podcast for Mississippians with disabilities. Today we're going to go into our final episode on Mississippi prisons following the release of our public report a few weeks ago. Of course, if you haven't read that or seen that, it's available on all of our social media platforms. It's available at drms.ms/prison. But today we're going to flip the script just a little bit. We've highlighted in our report, and we've talked a lot on previous episodes about what Mississippi is not doing correctly in our correctional facilities. Now I just want to back up a little bit and discuss about what they should be doing and kind of go over the laws that outline the obligations, namely the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I'm going to refer to as the ADA for short and sweet purposes, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is commonly known as the Rehab Act, so I'll probably refer to it as such in this podcast. So today, our Communications Director, Jane Walton, is with me for this discussion. So we're going to have a little back and forth. Jane, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me, Greta. So I kind of forced myself onto this episode because when we're talking about prisons and disability rights and what's going on in Mississippi, no one in our agency knows more and knows better than Greta as, head of our civil rights team and the person who's kind of been leading this charge within our agency. So we kind of wanted to turn the tables and ask Greta some questions because, again, she knows more than anyone. So I guess kind of to kick it off, in our last episode, we kind of began the conversation about the findings in our report on prison conditions in the Mississippi Department of Corrections, which we call MDOC, in those facilities. We kind of talked about where we are and how we as an agency got here doing this work and what we found. But let's start with taking a step back and kind of widening the lens to get a better understanding of how we as a state got here. Starting with taking a look at the incarcerated population and the prevalence of disabilities within this population. So we've talked about the conditions for offenders with disabilities, but I'm curious, how many people are we talking about? Obviously every offender with a disability or not is impacted by these horrific conditions, but can we put some numbers behind the population of offenders with disabilities in these MDOC facilities?
Yeah, so the Department of Justice, they actually have a study, and I'd like to say it was recent, but it's actually from December 2015, and I don't believe they have updated that report since. I can't imagine the statistics are much different than it was in 2015. It may even be worse, but the study from the Department of Justice found that about 3 in every 10 state and federal inmates reported as having at least one disability. And what their report covered was hearing and vision impairment, cognitive disabilities, ambulatory disabilities, and independent living disabilities, which basically means that some form of daily living, these inmates had difficulty completing those tasks. And so when you hear that statistic, you immediately want to think, okay, well, maybe this individual came into the facility with a disability. But what I think we forget about is that given sentencing guidelines in Mississippi and our capacity to quickly incarcerate individuals, you're looking at an aging population. Mm-hmm. And so for many individuals that are in our correctional facilities, it's not necessarily the disability they bring in with them, it's the disabilities that occur over their time in these facilities. So the natural process of aging sometimes brings about these disabilities. And so we're looking at individuals that go into MDOC facilities as 20 or 30-year-olds, and they're there through their elderly years.
Right.
So these disabilities are just occurring naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So I compared some other studies in that the median age of incarcerated individuals in 1993 was 30. So that increased to 36 in 2013. So it's projected by 2030 that inmates over the age of 50 could be 1 in every 3 individuals. So that's 33% of individuals in our facilities could be over the age of 50 by 2030. Mm-hmm. And that's just a staggering number when you think about just the natural process of aging and how our bodies react to aging. So I just thought that was a very staggering number, because in the grand scheme of things, when you look at number of individuals incarcerated in Mississippi, 33% is quite a bit.
Absolutely. And I would add, because of the state of these facilities, you also have a ticking time bomb of mental health crises, additionally. And so you've got, mental health crises and an aging population. And then there's also this idea of us not necessarily knowing if everyone has, what's going on there. What is that process like of identifying offenders with disabilities? Do they have to self-identify, and what does that kind of lead to?
So I think we'll get into it more later, but, assessment upon entry into these facilities would solve a lot of problems, right? But what we're seeing is that's not always happening at intake, and that's both intake into MDOC facilities. We're seeing that lack of assessment when individuals enter into county jails. Just that lack of initial discovery from the intake administrators leads to individuals with disabilities being put into these facilities. There's no knowledge that they have these needs or needs for accommodation. And the process of self-identifying as having a disability or multiple disabilities in prison is, number one, it's very hard to do. Once you're already in there and you're in the day-to-day life of being in one of these correctional facilities, our clients have reported it's just hard to let them know, hey, you missed this in my intake. I need this service. I have this issue. But there's also a stigma with self-identifying once you're already in a facility, especially an MDOC facility. So there's a lot of complications that could truly be resolved if you had a thorough process at the get-go to identify an individual's needs before they're placed in a facility, because those needs could kind of dictate where they're placed, right? They could need to be put in a certain residential unit. They might need to first go to a medical unit before they go into a general population. I think that is, and I know we'll talk about it a little more later, that is a major issue both at the state and county jail level.
Right, and we talked about it in the last episode. It's kind of like once you're in, there's not a lot of going back. So if if your disability is not maybe extremely apparent upon you entering in these facilities, a couple of years in, you might need an accommodation, and there's really nowhere to go.
Right.
And then when you look at the conditions, the photos, when you hear the stories, you can only get a small idea, but an idea nonetheless, kind of what's going on behind these walls and how horrific it is. And so you can kind of begin to imagine the hopelessness or the fear, and the notion of just trying to get through the day of, they're just trying to stay alive, really. So when you look at it like that, I think you can definitely understand that fear of self-identification, of an offender saying to themselves, I'm already so vulnerable here. What is that disclosure going to do?
And just going back to the aging, I think, when people have this concept of what a person with a disability might look like, right?
Right.
Some people think, it would be, visual. It's a physical disability that they can see. And that's not always the case. Conditions like diabetes, hypertension, asthma, those types of illnesses fall under the ADA, and clearly some of those are illnesses that develop with age.
Right.
And so I think that's another issue, especially when inmates come in for their initial assessment, is that administrators don't think to look for the non-visual disabilities that may be present in these individuals. We have several clients who have very progressive diabetes. That's something that they might have come into the facility with, or it may have even developed over time. And not only does that affect what kind of medication they may need, but it also affects what kind of food they need to eat.
Right. Needing exercise.
Right. I mean, it affects every corner of their life, or that could get worse.
Right.
And so I think that, again, going back to the lack of assessment upon entry, I think, we have to look past the visual too.
Mm-hmm.
We have to know that some people's disabilities do not manifest visually. You
Right.
have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, and then absolutely could be exacerbated by the conditions they're living in. Think about, in monitoring, we saw what appeared to be mold, and you think about that in terms of asthma, and literally living in a toxic environment, and how that can manifest itself over the years. So we know a bit more kind of about the population now, so let's switch gears to the legal side of things here. We've talked about what we've seen inside the facilities, talked about the obvious rights violations we've witnessed, but aside from saying, wow, yikes, this is inhumane, what laws are applicable here? What legal recourse exists to say that this isn't just bad, but this is a violation of rights as defined and codified by law in our country?
So you're looking at a few different things. First, you want to look at Section 504 of the Rehab Act, and that applies to federal prisons, jails, and detention centers, as well as private prisons and state prisons that receive federal funding. And so, spoiler, that's most of them. This also would apply to local jails. Then you want to consider the rights under individuals' rights under the ADA, specifically Title II. And so, considering that the MDOC manages our state prisons, this places them under Title II of the ADA. And that goes for local jails, juvenile justice facilities, and this can extend to private prisons and contractors, but this does not extend to federal prisons and jails. Now, anything outside of Section 504 of the Rehab Act and ADA, you'd have to look into 42 USC Section 1983. That's going to extend more to misconduct and things that aren't covered by the ADA or the Rehab Act. Of course, you can always look at potential constitutional claims, such as the 8th Amendment, which is, prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. So there's a few things you can look for. Of course, here at DRMS, we look for things that may be in violation of the Rehab Act or the ADA.
Gotcha. So, what does that kind of mean in terms of what that looks like in a prison? How does that apply to programs and kind of what's going on in the day-to-day lives of these offenders?
So, the ADA absolutely outlines that it's to be applied in prison settings, and that any inmate who qualifies under the ADA should not be excluded from services, programs, and activities. Now, services, programs, and activities is very broad. Mm-hmm. And of course, it can vary a little bit from circuit to circuit. Mississippi's in the 5th Circuit, so that you're going to have a little bit more constrictive interpretation here as you would in other circuits. But, that can be extended to mean educational, vocational, rehabilitative work, work release, treatment, religious, training or instruction, educational, vocational, mental health treatment, medical treatment, because an individual is in prison, and so the prison kind of oversees every bit of their day-to-day life, right? So the prison covers all corners of their life. That is why many circuits have broadly interpreted what services, programs, and activities means under the ADA, just because a prison setting is so comprehensive and so all-encompassing. So it's construed very broadly. And one of the things that a mentor from the Alabama PNA said in a webinar recently, and I thought it was so great about the ADA, is that you should use or think of the ADA as a shield and not a sword. You're not trying to get something for someone, you're trying to level the playing field. And so in prisons, it's a lot harder to do because the prison controls every function, every part of a person's life who's in that facility. So that's why I think the prison setting, it's a lot harder for them to stay in compliance with the ADA and the Rehab Act, because they have to think about so many different things. They have to think about making sure someone can get to the toilet, making sure someone can get to the dining services, making sure someone can get on work release if even if they have a physical disability. So that's why I believe, and we've had some talk throughout the network about why it's so hard for prisons to come into compliance with the ADA, because they have so many factors to consider.
Right. And, thinking of that ADA like a shield and not a sword, that's something we say so often with just disability rights topics generally, is, we're not asking for, like, gilded flying wheelchairs or for a MDOC facility to be the Ritz-Carlton or something that's unreasonable. That's the very nature of the ADA, is just asking for reasonable accommodations that just are enabling people to live as human beings, really. So, because of, the precedent set by the ADA and these laws, and because, kind of, like you said, it covers all areas of an offender's life, just really their basic needs as a human being. So what does that mean in terms of the duty of the Department of Corrections? What is MDOC's duty?
So the best summation I can put out there as to what MDOC owes their inmates is they have an affirmative duty to provide proactive accommodations that provide meaningful access, which may require changes in policy or an accommodation by the prison. And so, to me, like I said, that was the best definition I thought I could give of what their duty is. And you just said it. Like, we're not asking them to build new buildings, although they could use them. We're not asking them to completely knock down walls. You're just asking them to provide meaningful access to individuals with disabilities in their facilities. And that may mean they have to make an accommodation. And it also may mean they have to change their policy. Swinging into a policy change that we have been looking at, and an issue that is very prevalent for our clients is, one of the ways that inmates are asked to alert MDOC that they need an accommodation or they have a request is they have to go through a process. It's a process that's outlined in MDOC policies and procedures. However, it's a process that many of our clients have found to be met with tons of obstacles. It could be that they aren't given pens and paper to write, what they need and to provide that. It might be that they are told what the process is and then they are unable to complete it, which, it might be, hey, you need to put this request in this box outside of your residential unit. Okay, well, the box goes missing. Yeah. And so not only are we seeing that as a problem in like an accommodation request process, but one of the issues when inmates are denied an accommodation or they feel like their rights have been violated in any way, they are, by law, MDOC is required to set up and fully inform the inmates of their grievance process. This is a very important process for many reasons. It's just like when an individual wants to sue their employer, they have to go through the administrative remedy of contacting the Equal Employment Office. Right. Okay, so when one's in prison, you have to go through this grievance process before you can pursue any other outside remedy. Well, what we have seen in MDOC facilities is this grievance process has major obstacles. Just like with the accommodation process, our clients cannot submit grievances. They know the process, but at some point of every step of the process, there might be an obstacle. Right. So they request a pen and a form. Well, the forms are out. Their forms haven't been printed. I'm sorry, we can't give you a pen or a pencil. Okay, well, once they get that, we'll put the form in this box. The box will be in this location. The box is never in that location. So you see, when the people in MDOC facilities are trying to follow the rules and trying to follow the process of getting what they need, or telling MDOC they're not getting what they need, they're getting stopped at every possible turn. Right. And it's a problem. We've had clients who the first question we ask them when they tell us they have not gotten an accommodation that they need, they haven't gotten their medication, the first question we ask, well, have you filed a grievance? Well, they won't let me. Right. The guard won't take my grievance form. The box is gone. I mean, it's it's a problem because not only are they not getting what they need, but they're not being able to exhaust all possible remedies while they're in the facility.
Yeah, and even backing up, I mean, just the process itself is inherently inaccessible. What if, you know, you have a developmental disability and can't write? Or, you know, what if you have a physical disability that prohibits you from using a pen? I mean, just there's no alternative. And, you know, obviously that's impacting these individuals in a really dangerous way. You know, their lives could potentially be at stake if this is, you know, a medical emergency or something. So that's one big issue.
Yes.
Among many big issues. Can you kind of get into, again, some of the other issues that have been the focus of DRMS monitoring over the years?
Sure. So the big, I would say the overarching issue that we're looking at because it affects people's well-being in day-to-day life is the lack of medical and mental health care that we're seeing in MDOC facilities. And so while this varies from circuit to circuit, the Fifth Circuit being among the most conservative in the country, the failure to provide medical care could violate Title II of the ADA. However, the refusal or the denial of medical care has to relate to one's disability, and the denial and refusal must be related to the disability. Right. So, again, I've mentioned some remedies can be sought under Section 1983, and there's some constitutional claims, but again, we're seeing a large lack of mental and medical health care, and that's concerning, of course, but we're seeing everything from refusal to provide appointments to see physicians, people who are not getting their regular medication. You know, we have several clients, you know, I mentioned before, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, those kind of non-visible disabilities who are not getting the care they need, and those are illnesses, like many illnesses, that just worsen over time if you don't keep a check on them and you don't use the proper medication or treatment. Aside from that, we also have been looking closely at the seclusion and exclusion of inmates with disabilities. So the ADA has an integration mandate that applies in the prison context that states that prisons have to provide programs and services in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of prisoners with disabilities. So there's a problem there. It's kind of twofold with MDOC. We're not seeing a great variety or offering of programs and services that would feed into the rehabilitation of individuals in correctional facilities, right? We're not seeing a lot of educational, vocational, recreational type programs that one would hope to find in facilities that promote rehabilitation. So that's problem one. Problem two is we are seeing tons of structural and physical accessibility issues that if those programs were provided, we don't know how our clients, specifically those with physical disabilities, would be able to participate. Right. And what you're looking at is just many facilities, many buildings that are outdated, that have had no real work except maybe to touch it up before the legislature and the governor came to visit. I mean, you're seeing just aging, deteriorating buildings. So if you were to have these great programs, which we haven't seen evidence of, how would you integrate your entire population into those services? Right. So I've talked about that. I talked about the physical and structural accessibility. Another issue with seclusion and exclusion of inmates with disabilities is classification, security classification. Now, we haven't seen a ton of this, but this has been very prevalent across the network. In that we've seen Department of Corrections elevating an inmate with disability to a higher security classification so that they are put into a smaller unit so that they can just be kind of put out of the way, right? Like, I don't want to deal with anymore, put them with the maximum security guys. So you're looking at someone who may be in for a nonviolent drug type crime
Right.
put with maximum security individuals. Somebody with a disability that hinders their mobility, or they have a visual impairment, they have some kind of issue that it makes it dangerous for them to be with people who may have full use of their limbs. I mean,
Right.
it's just a very discriminating way to kind of quote unquote take care of the individuals they don't want to deal with.
Right.
And it doesn't just happen to individuals with disabilities. We've seen this with Department of Corrections that do this with their quote unquote problem children. So it's another way to exclude or seclude inmates with disabilities so that they don't have to be quote unquote dealt with.
Right.
They can just stick them over in another area. The maximum security folks don't get as much freedom, they don't get as much movement. So it's easy to stick somebody who has a mobility issue so that they don't have to worry about getting them in and out of the building, right? So that's definitely something that we've been looking for. And then on top of all that, we had some reports that isolation, that is a punitive element that is used in Department of Corrections when somebody gets unruly, or they just, they maybe have shown signs of attempting to harm themselves. They put them in an isolation type. I think it's called the hole at Parchman,
Right.
is what our clients have told us. We have some reason to believe that that's being used with some of our clients who have mental illnesses, because it's kind of a chain reaction, right?
Right.
They're not given the medication or the treatment they need. They of course start exhibiting symptoms that correlate with their mental health issue. They're causing a problem. Let's stick them in seclusion. Right. It's just a chain reaction that starts and ends with Mississippi Department of Corrections failures. So that's something that we've been looking at as well.
So obviously the things that we're looking at the conditions in the report, looking at the ADA, and then, what you see kind of going on versus what is outlined in law, there's a vast disparity.
Right.
So, that big question, the billion-dollar question, if you're looking at Alabama and the federal intervention in their corrections facilities, is where do we go from here? I think we've, I can kind of speak for all of us that have been involved in this report. We've kind of encountered a prevalent attitude of, especially from leadership, of, this is a runaway train and it's on fire and the tracks are about to go over the edge of a cliff. Kind of this like resigned shrugging of like, well, what can you do? It's really bad. So again, that big question, like what can be done? What can the state do to make substantive and systemic progress in these facilities and soon?
So it's a really interesting question. If you have had any knowledge of Commissioner Kane's response, I don't know if he's responding directly to our report or just the fact that the Department of Corrections failures are back in the spotlight. Commissioner Kane has very positively stated that he intends to have this remedied by this summer, and he believes that there have been major strides in the facility. I think he's wrong. I don't think there's going to be a path for remedy that results in the summer being the end game. I think there's a long way to go. One of the things that DRMS is looking for, I guess first and foremost, is just like I mentioned, is the appropriate screening and intake when somebody is sent to a facility. Especially if they've been noted to have a disability, I think there needs to be appropriate screening. I don't think that is happening at this point. And of course, even if they're appropriately screened, I'm not confident that they're going into a department or an agency that has a grasp on appropriate mental health and medical care for people with disabilities, specifically not appropriate mental health care. I think we've mentioned in past episodes, our clients have reported, those clients with mental health issues have reported to even see the one mental health professional that MDOC has on contract, they basically have to have attempted suicide at some point.
Right.
Have really put the ball in motion and had an actual suicide attempt. Not that they're manifesting, not that, it's getting to that point. They can ask to speak to someone and it just goes, falls upon deaf ears. I think that leads into having open communication with individuals who have identified as having a disability or multiple disabilities. And I think they have to understand that this is a case-by-case analysis. One size does not fit all when it comes to someone with a disability. Accommodations are different. Somebody can have the same illness or the same disability as someone else, but they may require a completely different accommodation. They may have a completely different treatment plan, a completely different medication. And I think our issue is, we have mentioned in past episodes that the Department of Correction literally serves as the largest mental health facility in the state of Mississippi.
Right.
And if we're going to use those facilities as such, we owe individuals in those facilities to provide them appropriate mental health and medical care.
Right.
Period. You can't have a state like Mississippi who has some of the highest incarceration rates in the country and just stick them in there without any type of rehabilitative services or mental health services or medical services. You just can't.
Right.
You can't go half-cocked in that regard. So I think for us, it's a lot bigger issue than Commissioner Kane lays it out to be. And again, I've read his responses, I've read his reports, I've read a lot of media outlets giving him some credit when we go into these facilities every day, and the things that he is bragging about in the media, they're not happening.
Right. I also think, you see in his response, and it was specifically in response to a reporter inquiring about our report and the conditions for offenders with disabilities, when he said that, I believe the date he gave was June.
July. Okay.
Well, this summer, like you said.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to a lack of really acknowledging the problem. And some of these other, glowing news reports that have come out, I think, he's quoted as saying, well, there are no holes in the walls and parchment is painted and clean. And it's like, okay, you can slap a fresh coat of paint on top of mold, whatever. But, and whether that's true or not, of, whether some, vanity projects are being completed, that's not what we're talking about here.
Right. I mean, it's common sense.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to sell your home and you have an appraiser come out and he tells you have significant foundation issues, like many of us in Jackson have faced before, and you go hire someone to fix your roof and paint the outside of your house, you didn't fix the problem.
Right.
You didn't fix the fundamental problem that's going to keep you from selling your house. So that's just common sense. I don't care how many shades of paint. I don't care if he paints parchment pink.
Yeah.
It does not fix the root of the issue, in that you have some major structural and physical accessibility issues. But more importantly, I have not heard him once mention improvements upon his medical and mental health care for the inmates in his facilities.
Bingo.
And so I don't care. He can paint all he wants. And to go a step further, some of the things, and because you've been in conversations with me and our monitoring team, when Commissioner Kane says we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, I send my monitors in to check.
Yep.
I don't just take Commissioner Kane's word for it. Just like he released a plethora of things that he stated that he did in response to COVID-19. I mean, there was a laundry list of elements that he said that he put in the facilities to keep inmates safe. And we put it on our monitoring checklist. I have not once seen any of that.
Right.
So, I understand that Commissioner Kane is on a media blitz to make it sound like that there's improvements happening, but there's not. And it's a very large disconnect when you have the head of this department going on media outlets saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and we're a facility that literally goes in and he's not doing it.
Right. Our monitor was in Parchment yesterday,
yes,
right?
Our monitor was in Parchment yesterday. I gave her a list, sent her a link to Commissioner Kane's most recent interview, and I said, here is what he is saying is done. Please check these things. They're not done.
Right.
So, and I get that. I get that sometimes the public has to take the word of leadership, right? Because the public's not going into Parchment. The public's not going into CMCF. They're not going into these facilities. They can't check his work.
Right.
I mean, they can't go behind him and say, oh, he was right.
Yeah.
I'm telling you he's not right. I'm telling you this is what we do. And what I'm scared is going to happen is he is building momentum up to say, oh, we're going to have all this fixed by the summer or July or whenever. He's going to tell you guys in July it's done. It's not going to be done.
Right.
It physically is impossible. I've seen it. There is
there's no
years,
contractor on earth that can get that done.
There's years of work to be done here, and it's just it's not going to happen.
Right.
And I have not seen strides in Mississippi Department of Corrections moving to making that happen. And I think we talked about kind of what sparked and stepped on the gas pedal for our work in prisons here at DRMS. And it was the issues that came up at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. And once we got in there and we saw the issues and we saw the problems, I guess it was shocking.
Right.
It's a set of conditions that you and your worst nightmare couldn't comprehend.
Right.
And in no way is it our position or our hope that these individuals be put up at a Ritz-Carlton type facility, right? We understand that they're there serving for crimes that they have been found guilty for, and we understand that. However, there is a point when even serving out your punishment becomes cruel and unusual. And to serve in an MDOC facility right now is akin, for many people, as to a death sentence. And that's not the way it should be.
Right. And I think that kind of wraps things up. I mean, that's really the impetus behind this project, and kind of what it all boils down to is just, protecting the rights and the lives of these individuals, no matter where they reside.
Right.
So I think it's safe to say that we'll be watching,
Yes.
and we'll definitely keep y'all updated,
Yes.
and know that, like Greta said, we're checking the work.
Right.
Or lack thereof.
Right.
So.
Yes. And I think it's important, because, like I said, there is a large disconnect between the general population and what's going on in correctional facilities. And that's a natural disconnect. I mean, obviously. And so when you have someone in leadership come on the television and telling, your favorite nighttime news reporter, hey, I'm fixing it, it's all fine. I mean, it's easy to want to believe that.
Right.
Because all of us remember before, pre-COVID, before pandemic was, the main news topic, we remember seeing those deaths come across the news one after another, the uptick of gang violence. And so we want to believe that things are getting better. But, when we go in, boots on the ground, in the trenches every day, it's disheartening to see that even the small incremental changes that Commissioner Kane is trying to take credit for, that's not happening.
Right.
So I don't understand. I guess you could make these small incremental changes that you're trying to say you're making, but you're not. So, yes, we are hoping that we will keep checking that work and we'll start seeing a little movement, understanding that we are still watching closely. So,
is it safe to say that we're just getting started?
We are just getting started.
Well, thank you, Greta, for letting me come and pick your brain and for sharing your wealth of knowledge on this topic with us.
Yeah. Well, we'll sign off, and I want everybody to check us out on Twitter, on Facebook, stay up to date. We keep all of our latest information, news on there. And so until next time, I'm Greta Martin. This is Disability Rights Mississippi, and we are just getting started. The information provided during this episode does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. All content provided by Disability Rights Mississippi on this podcast is for informational purposes only.